Okay, real quick, let's take a look at that KD ratio. Today we're at 1.724. Before you guys start burning up the keyboard writing comments about my KD ratio, I know it doesn't mean shit. What's important about this, play the objectives, got it. It's become a thing, right? This is how I open my videos. I talk about the KD ratio, and as long as it's going up, I'm happy. It means I'm doing better than I did yesterday. And but I do appreciate everybody who comments about the KD ratio. I appreciate the advice on how to equip a tank. So in my last video, tanks for the memories, I had a guy tell me how to equip the tank for anti-personnel. I appreciate it. I set it up. It does work really well. Thank you. Today's going to be an interesting topic. We're going to cover climate change, and this is going to really set a lot of people's hair on fire, and I'm sure the comment section is going to blow up. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. The reason why I'm talking climate change and not money, I'm going to continue the money series. I've seen the comments. I hear you. I will do those. But the reason I'm doing climate change is not too long ago, I went to get a pizza from Papa John's, and the AC was out. And the woman, young woman behind the cash register was complaining about the heat. And I said, well, can you imagine it was like 100 years ago when there was no air conditioning? She said, well, it was cooler back then. And I looked at her. I said, really? I said, how much cooler do you think it was? She goes, oh, 10 or 15 degrees. I said, you realize that if your statement was correct, that we'd be in an ice age, that you just covered half of North America in a glacier? And it kind of made me start thinking about, trying to educate young people about, some truths here. And let me preface this. I'm going to start the video. Let me preface this by saying that, climate change and the environment has become a religion for a lot of people. And when you start challenging someone's religion, you start challenging their belief systems, things can get violent. If you don't believe me, look around the world, right? There's all kinds of people getting extremely violent when their belief systems are being challenged. And I'm going to say this like I tell my kids, that as all things in life, there needs to be a balance, okay? And let me finish the statement, then you'll understand what I'm saying about challenging belief systems. Everything in life has to be in balance. If it is out of balance, bad things tend to happen. So let's talk oxygen for a split second, right? If you have too much oxygen, believe it or not, you can die of oxygen poisoning. And if you don't have enough, you'll die of asphyxiation. Same with water. Too much water, you'll drown. Too little water, you'll die of dehydration. Well, the same thing applies to logic and emotion. If you have 100% logic, like Spock, live long and prosper, you will be told that you have no heart. And if you're 100% emotional, you'll be told you have no brain. And I think this is a big reason why our country is so divided right now, that we have one or two generations of people in this country that were never taught critical thinking at school, right? They were told that 2 + 2 = whatever feels right. It was more important to teach that, Joey has 2 dads and Mary has 2 moms, and that thing you pull out of your pants to go to the bathroom with, that thing is a tentacle because you're some unknown species, or that it's okay to take a piss in a litter box. And by the way, anybody that does that stuff, survey says Thorazine, you people have problems, and I think chemical treatment might be required. But there has to be a balance in life, and right now everybody's either emotional or logical. Nobody's willing to compromise. Right there, it's getting a little sporty down here, folks. There's no compromises anymore. It's my way or the highway. It's gotten very bad, and we're out of balance, right? Bad things are happening because this country is out of balance, and we need to fix that. So what I'm about to say, I want you people that are emotional about the green and the climate change, and your fingers are just itching to start banging away on the keyboard on the comment section. I'm asking you, put your emotion aside. I'm shooting a dummy. Did you see that? I thought the guy was a sniper. You put your emotions to aside for a minute. I want you to think about what I'm about to say from a logical point of view. Now, again, the critical thinking is not taught in schools anymore. The reason for, higher math, like, pre-calculus, trigonometry, calculus, things like that, isn't so much as, hey, let's figure out how much area is under a curve using differential equations, because how often are you going to use that in life? The reason we are taught that in school is for critical thinking, right? That's why the teachers want to see your work, and they don't care so much about your answer as how did you get there. They're looking to develop your critical thinking skills, and that is sorely lacking today in our school system. So put on your thinking caps. What I'm about to go over is going to definitely challenge things, because there's a lot of lies going on in this world, and I'm going to touch on why these lies exist at the end of this video. Now, anything that I'm about to say, if you guys feel I am wrong, I want you to please provide me with empirical data proving me wrong. And don't be pointing me to reports from quote-unquote scientists or, God forbid, Al Gore, who are making millions from grants that are being funded by organizations with an agenda, okay? So, with that said, let's talk real quick about the two big things that are affecting quote-unquote climate change. Number one is the ozone layer, and number two is carbon dioxide emissions. So let's talk about ozone for a minute. Now, I ask people this all the time, and I'd say 99 out of 100 people cannot answer this question. What is ozone? Don't tell me it's this layer in the upper atmosphere and that it's, this stuff, right? What is it? Okay, I'm going to play the Jeopardy. Do. Ozone is O3. It is 3 atoms of oxygen, okay? The natural state of oxygen is O2, 2 atoms of oxygen. That is the stable molecular structure of oxygen. We breathe it every day. That's oxygen. Well, a lot of nitrogen too, but that's oxygen. That's what keeps us kicking. That's what keeps us alive. So it's stable, and this goes back to chemistry, right? We're talking about molecular bonds that are formed by atoms sharing electrons, okay? And in the case of oxygen, it's sharing 2 electrons in the outer shell. And if you want to learn about electron shells and stuff, that is way deeper than I have time to go into, but go back to your chemistry. So O2 is stable. O3 is not stable, okay? So that is ozone. It is an unstable molecule of oxygen. So you got to ask yourself, okay, if it's O3 and it's unstable, how is it made? Ozone is made by electrical sparks, okay? Whenever there's a short in a computer circuit, whenever you touch 2 wires together and you get a spark, you smell it, okay? It has a distinctive smell, and it is created by electric sparks. Okay, so so that's ozone, right? That's the stuff in the upper atmosphere that protects us from quote-unquote harmful radiation. So what is quote-unquote harmful radiation, and why is it harmful? Solar radiation that is deemed harmful is called an ionizing radiation. I love blowing tanks, and I just didn't get him here. It is an ionizing radiation. What that means is that this radiation will strip electrons off from molecules or off from atoms, okay? And it breaks the molecular structure, okay? This is why it causes cancer, right? It damages the atoms and the molecules that make up cells, and that creates cancer. But at the same time, it will also destroy ozone, right? So this is how the ozone layer works, right? We have O3, an unstable element or an unstable molecule in the upper atmosphere. Harmful radiation hits it, right? Ionizing radiation, which strips the electrons off from the O3, breaking the molecular bond, and then it's free-ranging oxygen, O1, which then it doesn't like being in and will bond with other oxygen to create O2. So when ionizing radiation hits the upper atmosphere, hits the ozone layer, it strips and destroys the molecular bond, turning it into oxygen. Okay? So when that happens, right, you're destroying the ozone layer. The sun is destroying the ozone layer. So then, well, gee whiz, what happens then, Mr. Scientist? The Earth has a repair mechanism for the ozone layer, and I told you how ozone is made. It's made by electric sparks. So ask yourself, what naturally occurring thing is a giant electric spark? I'll give you a hint. Back to the Future, 1.21 gigawatts. Lightning creates ozone. It's a giant electric spark. It is, anywhere from gigawatts to gigawatts, even petawatts of power. And there are going to be some naysayers saying that ozone is a heavy molecule that's heavier than the oxygen-nitrogen mix that we breathe. So how does it get into the upper atmosphere? Okay, so thunderstorms have vertical currents. Okay, you have strong currents that blow up, and that is caused by the lapse rate. So when the Earth warms, this is how things work. Okay, so when solar radiation comes onto the Earth, it warms the Earth, and warm air rises. That's why a match burns up and not down and burning your fingers. So warm air rises. As the moist air rises, it is cooled in the upper atmosphere. It's called the lapse rate. Any pilot knows about the lapse rate. The lapse rate is basically that air, the temperature will drop about 2 degrees centigrade. It's like 1.98 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 feet in altitude decline. So as this moist air from the Earth rises, it cools, and then when moist stuff cools, it condenses, and that creates clouds. Okay, so when you have a lot of vertical currents, then you start creating thunderstorms, and these thunderstorms are big, and they tower, stratocumulus, where they have anvil heads. They tower tens and 20, tens of thousands of feet in the air, and these things have massive air currents that flow up and down, and this is where hail is formed. Okay, we're really getting into meteorological stuff here. When storm clouds drop water, rain, in these storm clouds, they will actually get caught in these currents and be pushed up into the upper atmosphere, where it gets so cold they will freeze, and then they will fall, and then if the current's strong enough, it'll grab it and throw it up in the atmosphere again. And as it's traveling up and down, it's catching other water, and it's freezing, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it becomes hail until the hail is so large that these currents can't hold it in the atmosphere anymore, and it falls to the Earth, and that's hail, that's ice. So these currents are extremely strong. I mean, there are reported cases of hail the size of softballs or bigger, weighing pounds of chunks of ice. So these currents are extremely strong. So when the ozone is created, these strong currents will actually throw it into the upper atmosphere and thicken the ozone layer. So this is how it works. Let's go back, billions of years when the Earth was new, just rolled off the assembly line, and we're going to make the assumption that the ozone is nice and thick, that it's nice and healthy. So what happens? Solar radiation, ionizing radiation, hits the ozone layer. Not very much gets through. So the Earth is cool. It doesn't get very warm. But over time, that ozone layer will start getting depleted. And because the Earth is cool, by the way, you're not having very many thunderstorms, right? If the Earth isn't warming, you're not having as much currents blowing up. People hate it when I do this. Ran into a squad, though. If the Earth is cool, you're not going to have as many thunderstorms because you're not having as many, much warming of air where it rises. So the Earth is cool, not many thunderstorms. Over time, that ozone layer is going to be destroyed by the ionizing radiation, and it will thin. And as it thins, more solar radiation will reach the Earth's surface and warm the Earth's surface, where it then, warm air rises, cools in the clouds, creates thunderstorms. Thunderstorms create lightning. Lightning creates ozone. Ozone thickens the ozone layer. It's a cycle, people. This cycle is about 60 or 70 years old. And in the 70s, you guys can go Google this. I think it was Time Magazine actually had an article in the 70s talking about the next ice age. And the cover had a picture of a polar bear on it. They were predicting the next ice age in the 70s. Then in the 90s, all of a sudden it was global warming. And I think we're back into another cooling cycle because this last year there wasn't a single hurricane that touched the U.S. soil because there just weren't that many. So the oceans are cooling. I think we're back into a cooling phase, which is why I think we've already seen colder weather. In fact, I saw snow in the south before Thanksgiving. Heat miser, cold miser. They're having a feuding. So that's the ozone layer, right? It isn't some mystical aerosol that's giving girls big hair that's blowing a hole in the ozone layer. The reason we have a hole in the ozone layer is because we finally had satellites in the 70s and the 80s that could see it. I believe it's always been there, and it has to, I think that has to do with the magnetic field. The magnetic field controls the ionizing radiation. That's what creates the aurora borealis. Is when solar radiation hits the magnetic field. And I think that's why we have a hole in the ozone layer, is as a result of that. I think it's always been there. I just don't think we've ever seen it. So this whole premise that my car emissions is blowing a hole in the ozone layer, I call bullshit. Okay, when you can show me the wormhole that's sucking the exhaust gas out of my car and taking it to Mars to justify why Mars is going through the same climate change that we are, okay, I might subscribe to your interpretation, but until then, I call bullshit. And by the way, I am much more inclined to believe that this giant ball of fire that is 1 million times the size of Earth is controlling our temperature variances more than my car. I love blowing tanks with C4. The other thing is a shorter topic. We talk about CO2, and people are like, CO2 emissions. Cows farting is destroying, causing climate change because it's quote unquote a greenhouse gas. Let me enlighten people. I would rather go through a global warming than a global cooling. Okay, global cooling is by far a lot worse than global warming because crops fail, and when glaciers, start moving south. The Great Lakes were carved by glaciers from the last ice age. And when, crops fail and plants die, right? We eat things that eat plants, or we eat the plants themselves. I mean, that is extremely bad. Global warming is not so bad as long as we stay within the habitable temperature zone. I have no issue with it. And the fact that we've only seen a temperature change of 1.5 degrees Celsius over the last 10,000 years, last 1,000 years. Yeah, I'm not sweating it. But when it comes to CO2, it's really interesting. In my last job, when I was actually working in corporate America, there was this guy that was convinced that CO2 is evil. And I said, there's this natural occurring thing that is all over the surface of the earth that takes CO2 and converts it to plant food and oxygen. And those are called plants and algae in the ocean. And trees and these things take CO2 and convert it to oxygen and plant food, and they tend to do well. That's why it's called a greenhouse. You use greenhouses to grow things. That's a good thing. So if we have an excessive amount of CO2, quit cutting down the trees, and maybe we wouldn't. So I call bullshit on that too. I mean, there's a natural, solution to excessive CO2, and it's called plant life. Didn't you guys ever do, that experiment in elementary school or junior high where you have two plants and you talk to one and you don't talk to the other, and the one that you talk to does better because when you breathe out the CO2, the plant likes it and absorbs it, converts it to oxygen and plant food. So photosynthesis, it's a wonderful thing. If you're worried about, cows farting, plant a tree. And by the way, the whole, we got to eliminate the cow herds because their flatulence is destroying the environment. Termites actually produce more CO2 than cows, and I don't see these people with an agenda going after the termite mounds. Okay, so there's an agenda here, right? There are scientists that are making millions and millions of dollars in grants to write this, this climate change, story, and then people get wrapped into an echo chamber that amplifies it and turns it into a religion. And this is, and you have to ask yourself why, right? Why? You gotta love this guy, man. I popped this guy. He was hiding under that tank with a machine gun. Why are they doing this? And I would encourage you to read a book called The Report from Iron Mountain. It was published in 1967. It was actually a commission by the federal government to some, long-haired, people from colleges to come up with a way of population control. And one of the number one things that has to be in place to control a population is that there has to be a threat to the survival of mankind. So, the late 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, it was nuclear annihilation from a nuclear war with Russia. And after the Cold War ended in the early 90s, right, they needed something else to keep people's energy and mental focus on and away from what, politicians are doing. And that turned into climate change. Now, look, if you guys think I'm full of bullshit, go back and look at every single prediction from, like the 90s when Ted Danson from Cheers made a statement that the Earth was going to die if we don't, do something soon. And Greta Thunberg sitting there going, how dare you, and talking about that, we're all going to die in 10 years, which passed like 5 years ago. Every prediction that has ever been made has failed, including Al Gore's, who flies around in a private jet and burns more carbon than you and I combined. So I don't believe in this carbon footprint bullshit. We got trees and plants for that. If you're worried about it, go plant a tree. And I don't buy the ozone stuff because I just explained why in very logical terms. And if you think I'm wrong, I want to see empirical evidence that shows that I'm wrong. And, like I said, this is a hot topic, right? I'm challenging people's religion. And, put your emotions aside, put on your thinking cap, and listen to what I said. Everything I said is logical and sequential and makes absolute perfect sense. If you're going to come back at me calling me, some kind of name because you can't counter logic, I don't know what to tell you, man. Thorazine. So, anyways, I've run long, about 1 2/3 of my video. So that's it. I read every comment. This one ought to be interesting. It should be long, but I read every comment. I may not respond to every one of them, but I am truly humbled and thanked that you guys listen to me and watch my videos and are trying to help me improve. Last night I actually played with a couple of, there were 3 sweats. I'm calling them sweats. They don't think themselves sweats, but they were 3 sweats. And we actually dominated the game, and I've got that video, and that's going to be the next one. I'm just going to sit there and say, the fifth, Sea Bear played with, 3 sweats, and we own the game. And then I'm going to get back to the money. The next one I am going to talk about how to make money, and it may be 2 or 3 long because that's a pretty long topic about how to make money, but how to start a business and how to use taxes to your advantage. And why these super rich people are paying less tax than you are, and how they do it. I got the answers. You guys just have to be willing to listen and pass this on to friends that can help me grow the channel. Right? It's been kind of stagnant, so that's kind of one reason. Another reason why I'm kind of pushing a very controversial subject on this video is I want people to listen and help me grow this channel. And anyways, that's it. I've been running long. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments. And I look forward to this one. It ought to be interesting. This is Sea Bear out.